Right now it's time to talk to Peter Hicthens, a man of great common sense. I'm not quite sure where we begin today, Peter. We've got sort of Britain on the brink, you know, we've got the world on the brink, we've got Birmingham on the brink. I mean, it's anything from micro to macro, whatever you like, really.
Well, we are on the brink, aren't we? And we have been for some time. And I've said for many, many years that it will only take one major economic shock to set this country into a very, very serious downward spin. And I have to say, yesterday evening, I was worried that we might have reached that point. I still am, actually. I don't think that there's any real sign of anybody intelligent or rational in charge in the White House at the moment, and such things can lead to very bad consequences. And you look at events like the horrible Birmingham rubbish strike, and you see what a civilization looks like when it begins to fall to pieces. Now, in this case, it's just a labor dispute, but other things can cause these crumblings of our civilization to happen. And one of them, of course, is the complete shortage of money. The grave danger which continues to exist in this country and is always looking over our shoulder is how long will people in the rest of the world continue to have trust in the pound sterling? And if they stop trusting it, then it would presumably melt away here as well. And we live miles beyond our means at the moment.
Well, I was going to say, one of the
things...
Only
able to do this because of the continued fantasy that this is a major healthy economy, which it quite plainly isn't. And last night did make me worry quite a lot that we were on the road to some sort of economic and social meltdown, which haunts me all the time.
Yeah, because it seems to me that one of the reasons why Trump did what he did yesterday was nothing to do with the stock markets per se, but it was everything to do with the debt markets and everything to do with the amount of debt that not only is the United States in, but the rest of the world is in. And that's what makes it all so precarious, it seems to me.
This governs all major countries. I think it was James Carville, Bill Clinton's man of business, who pointed out that basically Clinton couldn't do anything if the bond markets wouldn't let him do it. Because this is the place in which governments borrow the money with which they carry out their activities. And if the bond markets start charging too much interest on what they lend to governments can't function. And that was what was coming out, that the forward rates of interest rates on American Treasury bonds were going up at an alarming rate. And I think that's what caused Donald Trump to reverse. Presumably his advisors were rushing in and out of the Oval Office saying, Mr. President, it's all very well about the art of the deal and all the rest of it, but on this occasion, you really have to listen. And otherwise he'd be Liz Truss. The problem with the President of the United States, of course, is unlike Liz Truss, if everything collapses around him, he's still in office. He can't easily be got rid of. And this would have left us with a really, really odd situation of a president who was responsible for a disaster, sitting in the midst of it and still at the head of the American government. I don't know quite where that would have gone, but it still seems to me to be a risk. I don't get the sense that reason is in charge in the White House at the moment.
No, but I guess one of the things that you might say, or at least I might say, you might not agree with me, is that it appears to be a bit more transparent. You know, you see what Donald Trump says, he does what he says, and then something happens. Whereas an awful lot of leaders over time, and I would count a lot of European leaders in this, have kind of secretly operated a kind of a black economy, if you like, of debt that they haven't really told anybody about. You know, like we hear the Labour government saying, oh yeah, we've just borrowed another 17 billion this month, but don't worry, that's not going to make any difference to your lives. And you're kind of going, well, you know, like you, I sometimes sit up late at night and go, well, where is this all going? And how much longer are we going to be doing it for? And when does it all end?
It's true that we have a lot of bad governments over the world, and ours has been for a long time one of those governments. As I say, we actually borrow money to pay interest on our debt, which if you knew of any individuals who did that,
you wouldn't.
They were in deep trouble. It's hard for me, looking at it from across the Atlantic, to develop a preference between a president of the United States who's obviously far too old to be in the job and a president of the United States who doesn't seem to really understand how the world works and treats the world economy as if it were a deal to buy a skyscraper in Manhattan, which it isn't, and it can't be run that way. I don't know. I don't think he knows what he is doing, and I think people are beginning to realize this. So now what? You have, for nearly 4 years ahead, a man in the Oval Office who doesn't know what he's doing. Is that preferable to a man who doesn't know who he is? The which is what we had for the previous 4 years.
Yeah, well, I guess you know, maybe he does know what he's doing, but he's a gambler. I think that's the thing that people find that makes it all so very uneasy, because I think they don't like a gambler. Yeah. But you know, at the same time, would you rather? I mean, I don't know what the answer is to this, really, because I mean, most of the people in the White House have been in one way, shape, or form deficient, either as moral characters or as liars, or as, you know, pretend you know, Democrats when they really weren't. You know, there's no such thing as a perfect leader, is there?
No, of course not. But I think the system by which American presidents, and indeed politicians in general in the United States, are selected is worse than ours, but ours is developing in the same direction, is a very bad system. And it ignores the reasonable and the thoughtful and the knowledgeable in favor of those who come over well on the Joe Rogan show, for instance. Now, is that really how you want the world to be governed? Because somebody goes over well on Joe Rogan? I don't think it is.
I think I'm less concerned about that than I am about the way that we are going here in this country. When I wake up this morning to see that there's a law firm based in South London who represent Hamas, who are instructed, as they say, by Hamas, a terrorist organisation, who wish to try and remove their proscribing as a terrorist organisation by the Home Secretary. I think we've got a little clip of Riverway Law. This is who they are.
We are instructed by Hamas. We are today at the Home Office, and we are going to hand in an application under Section 4 of the Terrorism Act to have them removed from the list of proscribed organisations. We have the application in here, which contains very, very strong legal arguments grounded in national and international law, and we're about to hand it in to Yvette Cooper and ask her to have some courage and make the correct decision.
And surely if they're instructed by Hamas, that's not legal, is it?
Well, I don't know. I'm not clear on the law of what a designated terrorist organisation can do, or whether lawyers can be employed by it. But I seem to remember some time ago, I dug out an old American State Department document on designated terrorist organisations, and which included, of course, the Provisional IRA, whose political wing are now welcome in the White House and Downing Street and everywhere else. And I said, how long will it be before the State Department does to Hamas what it's done to the Provisional IRA? The status of terrorist organization is not one which is necessarily firm. And the history of the Western governments, really, since the 1960s, has been that ultimately they give in to terror. I mean, remember when Yasser Arafat was regarded as a terrorist leader, he ended up as a supposed esteemed world statesman. So don't be surprised, is what I say. And remember also how we went on and on about how very much we were against al-Qaeda, and then we helped propel al-Qaeda into power in Syria. So these guys have obviously spotted a trend. I'm not saying I agree with them, because I
but it's kind of extraordinary in its way, isn't it?
No, it's not as extraordinary as you think. It's not that one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. I mean, Hamas is not fighting for the freedom of anyone, but for their right to tyrannize over whoever they rule. But it is true that yesterday's terrorist is tomorrow's statesman, as far as respectable international politics is concerned. And I make this point because people constantly seem to assume that there's some kind of moral sense driving international politics. There just isn't.
No.
We do business with the people it suits us to do business with. We do business with the military junta which rules Egypt, which shot down democratic protesters on the streets of Cairo because it suits us to do so. We do business with Saudi Arabia, which is the most appalling tyranny because it suits us to do so, while prosing on about how much we disapprove of tyranny in Russia. I'm afraid this stuff doesn't really make sense. As I said before, the only morality in foreign policy which can actually operate and work is to ensure, as far as you possibly can, the safety and the prosperity of your own citizens. Everything else is humbug. And I wouldn't be at all surprised if eventually Hamas and several other organizations now listed as terrorists don't become internationally respectable because it happens to suit the major powers that they should be so. They won't have changed. It'll be us that will have changed. But remember, I was reminded this morning by somebody on Twitter who claimed that I'd been in some way compelled to do it. On the contrary, I volunteered. I have spent, what is it now, nearly 27 years pointing out that in 1998, the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland surrendered to the Provisional IRA. at a ceremony in Belfast. And the consequences of this are absolutely disastrous. And people go on and on about how they don't like appeasement. It's one of the biggest instances of appeasement in modern times, where you end up with Martin McGuinness in white tie and tails having dinner at Windsor Castle. Martin McGuinness, a very proficient and undoubted terrorist whom we regarded as our dangerous enemy for years, actually invited into the establishment, and his organization allowed to get pretty much what it wants. And as time passes, this will be so. And still, if I say in public, actually, the IRA won in 1998, people say, how can you possibly say that? The IRA lost. And all. Well, how is it in that case, if they lost, that Martin McGuinness ended up having dinner with the Queen?
Yeah. And why is Sinn Féin a stronger political organisation now than any other in Ireland? And why is Ireland getting closer to a united Ireland?
I believe it's the only political party in these islands which is allowed to raise money abroad.
Interesting.
Another interesting feature of our life, which people don't notice enough, which is, of course, one of the reasons why it is so powerful.
Right, but so much of this as well is surrounded by a framework of lawyers and law, because it's almost as though the lawyers have taken over everything, which in my view is always a bad idea. Because they'll always give you a framework and a reason for why they can do something legally.
Well, there's not. I don't get too worked up about that. If you have the rule of law, then if the law says you must do something, then you must do it. And I think one of the things about the law is it is in fact fantastically honest about the true balance of power. And what these guys have noticed is the true balance of power tells them that it's quite likely that in time, the major Western nations will be seeking some sort of accommodation with Hamas, and it might well come off the State Department's list of terrorist organizations because it suits them to do so. People don't realize just how isolated the state of Israel is going to become in the world following the events that recently happened. And as a result, all kinds of people are going to be making accommodations with those they've previously dismissed. I would predict that, partly because of the huge damage to Israel's standing in public opinion in the United States following the events in Gaza. It also be the other way around. Israel was hideously attacked, and the behavior of Hamas, the invasion of Israel was beyond belief disgusting and appalling. But the response to it has been so ill managed and in my view, so disastrous that I think that large numbers of people in the United States who previously would have regarded support for Israel as an unquestioned aspect of their political views are changing their minds. That means that ultimately, without the support of American public opinion, Israel is in grave danger, and that will mean, I'm afraid, hideous accommodations with terrorist organizations by countries which now are very rhetorically rude about them. But honestly, it's the old story, isn't the more that he talked of his honor, the faster we counted the spoons, the more passionate the rhetoric, the more likely it is that the person emitting it will be doing the opposite in 10 years' time.
Yeah, exactly right. Peter, good to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed. Peter Hicthens, columnist at The Mail on Sunday there.